And then I usually go to the supermarket if I need stuff, and that's a little bit of 1 block further. I love going to 14th Street. I get the bus right down at the corner. He took me out on my first date. We went to a movie, and then we went into Manhattan on the subway, and he told me he was going into the Army. And he took me to Hector's Cafeteria in Manhattan on 50th and Broadway. And he didn't make a commitment or anything. It was only a first date. On the second date that we went out, we went with my girlfriend Adele Giskin, who really had a crush on him because she met him in my house. And
she the one who took her jacket off?
Yeah, she took a fur coat off in February, and she was wearing a bathing suit because she wanted him to see her figure. But he was unimpressed. Well, a month after he was inducted at Camp Lee, Virginia, he called me and he said, "Can I see you?" And he called me from Camp Lee. And I said, I was in my glory to think that he would even call me a month after his induction. And he came and he brought me a locket with the Army insignia on it, a gold locket, which I lost. You know, you could open it and put pictures in it. Well, I lost that, but I didn't lose him. And that meant more to me than the locket. My 3 beautiful grandchildren, Carrie, who was just here, my Jennifer, my Jenny, and Randy, my police officer. Okay, this is my husband and I in our younger days at my brother's wedding. I lived through a lot in 87 years. I can remember my earliest date was when I was 1.5 years old. And I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and I still remember the address was 367 Sackman Street in Brooklyn. I don't know how important that is, but we lived across the street from a school. I was the 3rd child of my father and mother, Sigmund and Jenny Wachschel. My father, who came from Warsaw, Poland, and my mother, Jenny, came from Latvia, from a town called Liepāja, and it was on the Baltic Sea. And she would recount tales of how she would go rowing with her boyfriend, Mr. Rosen, on the Baltic. And then my father migrated from Europe to this country, and my mother migrated, well, my father migrated in 1910, my mother around 1915. And then they got together at an uncle's house. My uncle matched them up, my mother's sister's husband. I don't know how important that is. But my father had a tick in his eye. And after he met my mother, and he got up from the table in the room, and the tick went to work, and she thought he winked at her. So she followed him out of the room, and the rest is history. They got married. My sister, the first sibling that I had, she died in 1922 on New Year's Eve. she came in contact with children who had contagious disease. They were neighbors, and my mother said, don't go into their home because you're going to become ill, and sure enough, she did. She developed blisters in her throat, and then they took her to a hospital for joint disease where they opened the blisters, and she died New Year's Eve of poisoning. The pus spread through her body, and she was only 5.5. The sad thing about that is that she would stand in the window across the street from the school where we lived, and she was 5.5, and she'd say to my mother, Mom, when am I going to start school? And she never lived to that. Well, the story that my father and mother told about her stayed with me for all my life, because they always cried. And the worst thing in the world is losing a child. And you don't understand when you're growing up, why are they crying? Why do they keep crying? Then we moved to another street in Brooklyn called Strauss Street. The number was 1872, near Pitkin Avenue. And I was about 1.5 years old, and I would crawl into my aunt's house. She lived across the hall from where we lived. And my uncle got annoyed with me, so he'd pick me up and carry me back into my apartment. The doors were always open. You were never afraid of being robbed. Well, from there, my father was a glove cutter, so he moved us to Gloversville, New York, about 220 miles upstate. And we lived in a small town. Our neighbors were very neighborly, and we had a very wonderful childhood there. My sister, that was the second sibling, and then I was the third one, and then my brother Julie, he's the fourth, and my brother Lou was the fifth.
So they were born up there?
No, Lou was born in Gloversville, New York. He's the only one. Mm-hmm. My brother Julie, when my mother was going to have him, came back to Brooklyn to give birth at Unity Hospital in Brooklyn. So she had him. We stayed with my aunt for a month. My sister and I killed her canary. We put it in a bathtub and gave it a bath. And we drowned it. I don't have to tell you. There's a 3.5-year difference between Julie and I, and my sister Zelda was 1.5 years older than I. She just died 2 years ago. And
tell everybody what you did to Julie, because he had a big head when he was a baby.
well, when my mother brought Julie home from Unity Hospital, he was lying in my aunt's kitchen in Brooklyn in a carriage, and he had a big head. He weighed 10 pounds. And for a baby, I thought, he's not going to cramp me out of my lifestyle. So I gave him a shot in the head. That isn't funny, McGee. But I did that anyway. Then we took, Julie was a month old, we took him back to Gloversville. And we grew up there. The Great Depression came, 1930. The crash was 1929. And when the Great Depression came, my father was out of a job. He was a glove cutter. And he worked in a glove factory in Gloversville. Gloversville was the glove capital of the world. And that's where we grew up. So my two brothers were younger than I. I remember being about 10, about 1934, when we moved from Gloversville to New York. Well, we lived in two different houses across the street from each other. So we lived at 123 Washington Street, and then we moved to 120 Washington Street. We had a porch upstairs, and a porch downstairs, and you didn't have that in Brooklyn. It was a good life for children. It really was.
Because you had a yard and you
We had a yard. We had a big cliff in the backyard that went down to the next street. So we would climb the cliff up and down. We were nuts. But we had a happy childhood.
until you had to run away.
Well,
Stowaway in the night.
we ran away because of the Depression. My father had no work, and he owed everybody in Gloversville money, all the bill collectors. So he hired a mover in the middle of the night. His name was Mr. Brundage. I remember it like yesterday. And I was 10 years old. And they moved the family back to New York. So we came back like a bunch of refugees on the Hudson River Night Line because we escaped the middle of the night. I had an uncle who lent my father money to bring us back to New York.
Which uncle?
My Uncle Harry,
Oh, Harry?
Fanny's husband.
Okay.
Well, he owned a shoe factory, so he didn't go broke. People had to wear shoes. We moved back to New York, back to Brooklyn, in a ghetto area, and I'm ashamed to say ghetto because we were actually ghetto. When you have no money, they call you ghetto. But it was a mixed population. We were black, we were Hispanic, we were white, and we all mingled together. And my mother enrolled me and my sister into PS 175, Public School 175. And my first day in the 4th grade, my teacher, Miss Entel, how do I even remember her name, said, I want you to get up and I want you to talk about anything that comes to your mind, because they were not accustomed to hearing a little 10-year-old with a foreign accent, you know, an upstate New York accent. And so I got up and I was very nervous and I didn't want to talk. And I stood there like, oh. And then finally, she started to question me and I began to answer so people could hear my upstate accent. And she indicated to the class that this little girl is from upstate New York. She has a different dialect than we have. So then I,
Philosophy.
But she sounds like she's from Brooklyn.
I was just gonna say,
well,
sound like you're from Brooklyn to me.
Right?
well, honey, I didn't get Brooklyn out of my life. I didn't get Gloversville out of my life. I can recount so much that happened to me. And I feel that, to me, that's worthy of everything. That's very funny. I was going to skip all the little details of my little girlhood and go into my teenage era.
Good stuff. I want to see where
When-
it all originated from.
I was 17 years old, and I met him in 1941. October, it was the night of Rosh Hashanah, and I had a date with a guy, and I had to stand him up because I didn't really like him. He happened to be a soldier. Boy, if I tell you a story about him.
I don't think I ever heard that story.
Well, later in life, you don't want to hear about him now.
No.
I want to talk about,
That's Leo Botwin? No.
no, don't mention Leo Botwin, please.
How many guys did you have?
I was gorgeous. Are you?
are.
You know, they're trying to put me down.
Oh.
You're going to have to edit
Yeah,
that.
1941. No, leave that in. That's so.
Well, World War II started December 7th when Pearl Harbor was bombed. In October, the night of Rosh Hashanah, I stood up this guy. His name was Jack Elkin. Don't put his name in. He came to the house and my mother told him I wasn't home because I really didn't want to see him. The other thing is my sister said, let's take a walk. on Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, and I was living on Herzl Street then, another ghetto area, another neighborhood. And we took a walk up Eastern Parkway, and 3 men approached us, young guys, and they were carrying a bag of peanuts, and they said, "Would you like some peanuts?" And we said, "Sure, why not?" Well, the other thing is that they took us over to a car, and they said, "Get in the car, and we're going to take you for a ride. We're going to eat out." And I said, "Really? Where are we going?" Now, those were days where you trusted people, and we didn't know, not to trust anybody. So
Stranger danger.
we got in a car, and the 3 guys took us to Howard Johnson's out in Howard Beach, Long Island. Well, it's really the borderline of Queens and Brooklyn. And we went to Howard Johnson's, and I ordered on Rosh Hashanah bacon, lettuce and tomato on toast, and coffee. And I think we all had that. Well,
Wow.
then they said, after we had a good time at Howard Johnson's, we went to, they said there's a clubhouse in one of the buildings in East Flatbush at 224 East 94th Street, and that's where my husband lived. In the basement of that building, it was a 4-family house owned by my father-in-law, who had multiple real estate, and he wanted his children all to marry rich. Well, P.S., I wasn't rich, but my husband fell in love with me. We went down to the club. It was like a cellar club. There was what they call a Victrola there, and my husband was 22 at the time, and I was 17. And he was putting recordings on the Victrola. And when I walked in and saw him, I flipped. And I said to my sister who was with me, "You see that guy over there in the corner? I'm going to marry him." And she said, "You're crazy." She said, "I know him. His name is Al Berman, and he'll never look at you because you're a half pint," and he was tall. Well, P.S., I said, "No, he's not going to marry me. Watch me." And I went over to him, and I said to him, "Hi, what are you putting on the Victrola?" And it was a recording which I couldn't even fathom what the name of it was because I wasn't interested. All I was interested in was meeting him. Now, he saw me coming in, but he played possum like he hadn't seen me because he was with another girl that I went to school with, to high school, Ida Itzkowitz. I was in my senior year. P.S., she didn't even graduate. She was a dummy. Well, anyway, when I approached him and I asked him what he was putting on the Victrola, he said to me, "Would you care to dance?" And I nearly died to think that this gorgeous guy is asking me to dance. Now, you could say I had a complex and I wasn't worthy of him, but that was because my sister put me down. She said he would never look at me. And my words were, "Watch me." So he asked me to dance, and I stepped all over his feet. And he was a great dancer. And we did a foxtrot. So he left me in the middle of the floor because he was very conceited and very egotistical. And he went over and he took this other girl that he came with, this ugly mutt, Ida, and he was dancing with her, and I said to myself, "Well, I'm not going to tolerate that." So I got a hold of another guy that we went down to the clubhouse with. His name was Manny Berman, the same last name as my husband. And he said, I said, "Manny," I grabbed him up onto the floor and I said, "Dance with me, quick. I want you to dance with me." I didn't want to give my future husband the satisfaction that he left me in the middle of the dance floor And I was so humiliated. So Manny danced with me, and P.S., he had terrible body odor.
Oh, that's so gross.
I'm sorry to put that in, but I guess in those days he didn't know about underarm deodorant. So then I thanked him. And then my beautiful husband left the clubhouse and he took Ida home. And then I didn't hear from him for 3 weeks, which I thought he was done with me, like my sister said he would be. And then 3 weeks later, he had a friend call me whose name was Georgie Moser. And Georgie lived across the street from him, and he was kind of a goony-looking guy, but if my husband said, call her, his friends would jump. So I know he liked me, but he didn't let on. So Georgie called me up. In those days, we didn't have a phone. There was a candy store across the street. The owner's name was Dinah, and they would call in the courtyard where we lived, Wackshell, telephone. So we would run down and give the caller a tip, you know, the one in the courtyard. You'd give him a nickel, whatever, for calling you the phone. Go across to the candy store, to Dinah's, and it was Georgie Moser. And I said, what the hell? I said, what's wrong, George? And he said, I'm calling you because my friend Al would like a date with you. And I said, really? And I was very taken back, and I said, you tell your friend Al that if he wants a date with me, he has to call me himself. You can't do his dirty work for him. So Georgie hung up, and 3 weeks went by, and finally my husband called me for a date. And I was very nonchalant, although my heart was skipping and beating and jumping. And I said, how did I ever get a date with him? Well, one day I took a walk on Pitkin Avenue, which was the main drag of Brooklyn, with my little friend Ida. She was 2 by nothing. In fact, Al Jolson had a song, Ida, sweet as apple cider. Well, to make a long story short, when we walked on Pitkin Avenue, as fate would have it, your grandfather was coming from Lincoln Terrace Park, my husband Al. And you know, he was wearing shorts and he was playing baseball. That was his favorite sport. In fact, he would take me to Ebbets Field to see the Dodgers play and the Yankees.
Dodgers.
Yeah, Brooklyn Dodgers. That was before they moved out to Los Angeles. Well,
Crazy.
he took me out on the date, and it was very boring, you know, and the thing he said to me, which really upset me, was, I'm being drafted into the Army. Our president then was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and they had a draft that was even before World War II. So he was drafted into the Army, and he said, why don't we ride? Well, I interrupted myself because I was with my little friend Ida, and he was with a baseball bat over his shoulder. He took me out on my first date. We went to a movie, and then we went into Manhattan on the subway, and he told me he was going into the Army, and he took me to Hector's Cafeteria in Manhattan on 50th and Broadway. And he didn't make a commitment or anything. It was only a first date. On the second date that we went out, we went with my girlfriend Adele Giskin, who really had a crush on him because she met him in my house.
Was she the one who took her jacket off?
Yes, she took a fur coat off in February, and she was wearing a bathing suit. because she wanted him to see her figure. But he was unimpressed.
What was your reaction when she did that?
I said to myself, she's trying to lose me as a friend. That's the way I felt. I knew what she was up to.
Sweet cheek.
She invited him over to her house, unbeknownst to me. She lived on Dean Street off Flatbush Avenue, somewhere in Brooklyn. And she and her mother tried to badmouth me so that he would go with Adele and not with me. And he came to my house and he said to me, I want you to drop your friend Adele. And he told me why. I don't have to go into detail. He said, she's not your friend, she's very two-faced. And she wanted me to date her, but I won't. He said, I'm just not interested. I'm going into the Army and that's it. Well, a month after he was inducted at Camp Lee, Virginia, he called me and he said, can I see you? And he called me from Camp Lee. And I said, I was in my glory to think that he would even call me a month after his induction. And he came and he brought me a locket with the Army insignia on it, a gold locket, which I lost. You know, you could open it and put pictures in it. Well, I lost that, but I didn't lose him. And that meant more to me than the locket. Then they shipped him off to Macon, Georgia, where they trained him as a medic. He was in the United States Medical Corps. By that time, Pearl Harbor was bombed. It was December 7th, 1941. And so it was kind of a long-term relationship by telephone, and I didn't have a phone, so we would run down the steps and answer the phone in the candy store as usual. He would call from, he was in Camp Lee, Virginia, then he went to Macon, Georgia, where he got his medical training. He was a medic. And then he called me from Georgia. Intermittently, he came in on furlough. Well, he came in March of 1943. He was inducted in 1941, and he said to me, we're going to go to a show tonight. And he was in uniform, and we're walking in the street, hand in hand. And he said, I want to ask you something. I'm being shipped overseas, and I don't know where I'm going to be. I'm not allowed to tell you. Would you marry me when I come home?
How long were you dating for at that point?
From October, Rosh Hashanah, until March of 1940, 42. 42.
October,
Isn't
But-
that a picture over there of him?
Yes. Do I show this picture?
Yeah.
This is a picture of my very handsome husband. He was 22 years of age when this was taken, and I was only 17. And we hit it off, and he was inducted as a buck private, and he worked his way up to staff sergeant, for which I was very proud of him. And not too many people were smart enough to get to that rank. And he was offered a rank of second lieutenant, and he turned it down. So he went as high as staff sergeant. He was shipped overseas. He called me on the phone from Macon, Georgia. There was a line from here to Timbuktu, because they were not allowed to make phone calls and let anybody know where they were being shipped. So he was shipped through the Panama Canal on a boat from Newport News, Virginia. that's another story. I went down to Newport News. He was calling me at my office where I worked. I worked for a law firm, and he called me there. And you heard a lot of rattling going on in the background because there was a line of soldiers waiting to call their families to tell them where they're being shipped. And in order to avoid being detected of where they were going, they made a lot of noise in the background so nobody would know where they're being shipped. And so they covered each other's behind, you might say, their back, covered each other's back. He was shipped to New Guinea in the South Pacific. It's an island, and a little island called Biak Island. He was shipped there. He spent 2.5 years there until World War II ended. He developed jungle rot. He took care of the wounded because the Japanese bombed Biak Island and New Guinea every time, every minute, every night, every day. They were on a beachhead. They slept in tents. They had it very, very rough. They set up a dispensary. He said the only way that I got these soldiers through their pain after being wounded and killed, well, those that were killed didn't need what he did. He would give them a shot of liquor to ease the pain. So they were brought into the hospitals. Then they had a show there, Hits and Misses of 1943. And they had a whole troupe of showgirls and actors and actresses come into New Guinea. They were flown in. They would put on shows for the GIs.
Wow.
And that's what got him through. He became involved with them. He became sort of a director to direct shows. He got involved in everything. He did so much. I have pictures of him, but not here. They're locked up in a closet because I don't want to look at them and sit and cry. So I keep them hidden. Someday you will all go through those pictures and see what an amazing man he was, how he could direct a show and be a medic and be in the Army and have a sweetheart back home. And finally the war ended in 1945, and there was jubilation in the streets. People were dancing and yelling and screaming. From 1941 to 45, so many soldiers were killed. And I identify with the war in Iraq and Afghanistan and all these countries that are underdeveloped. And the reason they're rebelling is they want their freedom. They want to be free like the people in the United States. That's why they're rebelling. They're out in the streets. They want their freedom. They have dictatorships. They have dictators that are killing them. And they're starving. They're hungry. And I think with no matter what I have plentiful because I earned my living. I went to work when my daughter was 2 years old and my son was 5. And I was a young woman yet. And my husband came home from the Army and he didn't want to go through the GI Bill and, become a professional person. His whole family was in the building line. They were carpenters and builders. They were all very well-to-do. So he went into that line of building. When there was no work, he worked through the union. When there was no work, I said, you know what, I'm going to go to work. My mother came every day anyway. My husband would pick her up. She lived in Brooklyn and Brownsville. I lived in East Flatbush, and I lived near Kings County Hospital. And my mother would come every day to be with my son and my daughter. And I said, I'm going to get a job at the hospital. So I walked in very brazenly. My mother was with my children. and I went to the employment office at the hospital. Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn was the second largest hospital in the United States, next to Cook County in Chicago. And I went in and I was interviewed by a woman, Miss Burns, and she said to me, I want you to do you take shorthand? I said, yes, I do. What do you take, Pittman or Gregg? I said, I take Pittman. I want you to take dictation from me. I want to see you type, and if you're a good typist. So I did my Pittman shorthand. She dictated to me, and I took it down verbatim. And then she set me up with a typewriter, and I typed 98 words a minute. And this was after being retired from working at law firms. So
I
then,
heard she was like 20. How old were you?
well, your mother was 2 years old, and Uncle Jay was 5. So I was 26 when I gave birth to you.
Oh,
Which is older
28.
at that time
Yeah,
to have a child.
but to make a long story short, when Miss Burns saw my typing, she said to me, not only am I hiring you, I'm putting you into the office of the superintendent, Dr. Israel Magallana. How the heck I remember his name, I'll never know. Well, he was taken back with me. He had a secretary, Margaret McElroy, and I just couldn't think of her name. And she thought I was competing with her, and I wasn't. So 10 months into the job, by the way, I was hired as a provisional. In other words, it was a civil service job because Kings County Hospital was a city hospital. So in order to be appointed officially, you had to take an exam. I took the exam, but before I was even placed, I was replaced by a woman whose husband was a dentist and had a lot of clout in the neighborhood. And she replaced me. Her name was Ida Goldsmith. So,
Another Ida.
yeah, she replaced me. And then I was out of a job. Well, I was called from the civil service list to come and interview for the Board of Education. I went to the Board of Education. I was interviewed. I was hired immediately. And I made friends with one of the assistants and personnel at 125 Worth Street, which was the main office for the Health and Hospitals Corporation. And his name was Jimmy Lorino, how I even remember that. But he loved me, he absolutely loved me, and he said, anything you need, call me and let me know. So I said, okay, I've got Jimmy Lorino wrapped around my little finger. I went to work for the Board of Education. I worked there 3 weeks, and they had me collating cards all day long, alphabetically, and I said, this is not for me. Let me call my friend Jimmy Lorino in personnel. Well, I called him, and he said to me, come down. I have a job for you near your home at Kings County Hospital. Was that incredible? Going from 120 Skirmahorn Street, the Board of Ed, to work at the county near my house and being appointed civil service, which to me was like God's will. So
Do we have other questions we want to ask related to?
I went to work at Kings County Hospital.
I don't know if there's space.
And they put me in the nursing office with the director of nursing. Her name was Mary Mullen. And she loved me. And it was a tremendous obligation I had there, working with the director of nursing. I hate to say it, but maybe I shouldn't. She was an alcoholic.
Wait.
I worked with Mary Mullen and her entourage, assistant superintendents,
So just keep going.
for 7 years. And then one day, I think she was loaded, and she was expecting a woman from the Psychological Corporation to come for a meeting. And I walked in to announce that this woman came for the meeting, and she got up from behind her desk and she pushed me. And she pushed me out the door and she said, "What are you waiting for? Why don't you show her in?" So I went and I showed her in. Then I walked myself across the hall to Miss Dora Hack, who was the assistant superintendent, and I belonged to an organization called Rofe in the hospital, so I carried a lot of weight. And I said, "Dora, get me out of the nursing office. I cannot work with Mary Mullen. She's a mad woman."
Oh, so you had one of those too.
Oh, yes. Nobody puts their hands on Sylvia Berman and gets away with that. Okay?
But she always gave me dolls at Christmas. She,
Really?
They got
Oh, she would.
Yeah, they get donations.
Well, yeah, the nursing office had all the gifts for the children's ward.
So you didn't get presents after?
And Mary Mullen would give your mother
No.
a big doll every
Was
Christmas.
that ugly doll that you still have?
No, a lot of parents bought me that.
Well,
But no, we used to go in, it was in the closet, and she'd say, "Pick off the
yes,
shelf,
she'd
whatever
say,
doll I
take
wanted."
whatever you want. So from the nursing office, I was transferred down to the head of the emergency room, and I don't have to tell you what a hotbed that was. And they put me in with a doctor called Dr. George Schmidt, and his wife's name was May, but he called her Maisie. And he had a son, George Jr. George Jr. lived in Kew Gardens, and Dr. Schmidt didn't let me work. He shared the office with me to the emergency room, and he would say, "You're doing too much. I want you to come over here to my desk. We're going to do a jigsaw puzzle." So we would sit and do jigsaw puzzles while the patients were dying in the emergency room. Now that wasn't very nice either.
That's the house, we went to his house for Christmas, right?
Yes, we went there for Christmas. He had a Christmas tree, and we had Christmas dinner there. He had a mansion on the grounds of the hospital,
Right.
and he didn't invite anybody for Christmas dinner, only me, Grandpa, and Uncle Jay, and your mom.
It's terrible.
Well, you know, I was with Dr. Schmidt from one day. He told me he was going to see a priest ordained in Ogdensburg, New York. The reason he was going there to see a priest ordained is when that priest was a child, he fell out of a tree and had fractured his bones and ribs and what have you. And Dr. Schmidt said, "I'm going to put this child back together again," and he did.
Wow.
So when the child grew up, he became a priest at a parish. And Dr. Schmidt went to see him ordained. And he died up there. He had a heart attack. He had a massive heart attack. And his wife accompanied the body back to New York. That was a big loss to me. A little guy, "This is Dr. Fink." He would answer the phone if I didn't get to it in time. And he was that
David
big.
Fink, right? David Fink?
No.
No?
Don't ask me his first name.
Repetitive.
I was unimpressed with him. I ran the office. He didn't know his ass from his elbow.
David E. Fink, I remember.
And finally, they put him in charge of the E building, which was tuberculosis. And I was glad to see him get out. We had so many buildings to Kings County, and I had to do all my business between all the buildings. To make a long story short, when he got in, then I got Anthony Iacone in, and I began to work with him. And he couldn't stand me because I think he thought I was competitive to him. And we hired another girl to help out with the work because I had so much work, I was overwhelmed. Everything I did, he told me, I could do that faster than you. It was never fast enough. And I was a whiz at everything I did. We had an assistant superintendent, one flight up, who worked with the superintendent of the hospital, and he became very friendly with me, Morris Kelsky. At one point, I had his daughter working with me, Stephanie.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Well, when I went up to Morris, I said, I have 7 years in the emergency room. You gotta get me out of there. I said, I'm working with Anthony Iacone, who doesn't know what he's doing, yet he's critical of me. He's telling me every minute of the day what I'm doing, he could do faster than me. And I said, well, let him do his own work. He said to me, you know what, Sylvia? Write me a letter, put it in writing, and I'm getting you out of there. Every director of the hospital loved me. They knew my capacity. They knew I was a workaholic. If I had to stay overtime, I would call your mother and say, Ellie, can you start dinner? I'm stuck. Am I right? And I would tell the orderlies, the nurses' aides, please remove the cadaver from my office.
It was horrible. I was so traumatized walking through there.
And they did. I had them lying on a stretcher covered up with a toe tag on the big toe. And I couldn't concentrate on what I was doing. I said, remove the cadaver, take it where it has to go. So they would take it down to the morgue. One day, Iacone sent me down to the morgue, and there was a cadaver lying on a table. They were doing an autopsy, and his chest was cut wide open and folded over onto his arm. And I walked in and I thought I was going to pass out. And I walked back out. I ran. I didn't take the elevator up. It was in the basement. I ran up the stairs. But I mean, these are incidentally things that you put up with when you work in a hospital. It's a life and death situation. You either do it or you don't do it. And if you
It's
don't,
not like that anymore.
do you know how many members of my family I had admitted there that died there? When I left Mr. Iacone, and I'm sure I could say God rest his soul, when I left him, they brought in a director of cardiology and the EKG department. And Morris Kelsky called me up and he said, he was the assistant director on the first floor. He said, how would you like to work in cardiology? I said, any place but get me out of the emergency room. Okay, so now he moved me up to the 6th floor in Building A to cardiology.
That was a better visit. Better walk.
Well, Dr. Richmond, who became director, he was discharged from the Army. He became director of the EKG department, came down to look me over to see if he wanted me to work for him. And he said, he walked in the office and he saw me and he said to me, when can you start? I said, when do you want me? He said, tomorrow. I said, good. You tell Morris Kelsky, the assistant director, you want me tomorrow. He went up to Morris Kelsky. The next day, I was transferred up to the 6th floor. I met different celebrities that came to visit up there. I met Pee Wee Reese. You heard of him? No? Well,
Not Pee Wee Herman.
he was, yeah, he played baseball.
And not Peter Lee.
By the way, he gave me an autographed picture of himself, which I gave to Jay, by the way.
Yes, it was hanging on the wall in the bedroom.
So I spent my whole life at Kings County Hospital. One day, I came into work and Dr. Richmond had a torn lining in his coat, and I hung his coat up for him. And he was the director of the EKG department in cardiology. And I took it home lunchtime. Betty Sapio was my accomplice. So I said, Betty, put your coat over his and I'll take it home. I lived across the street from the hospital. So I took his coat home and I sewed the lining on the sewing machine, but it didn't come out good because it came out like this. And I hung the coat up. And so he went to put his coat on to go home late in the day, and he couldn't get his arm in the sleeve. I had sewed the sleeve to the sleeve, and he couldn't put his arm in there. And so he said to me, Mrs. Berman, I shared the office with him, and there was like a partition, a door to go into his office. On the other side of the office, I had Dr. Nacht, and I'm in the middle. Would you come in here, please? I said, yes. He said, did you sew my coat? I said, yes. He said, how dare you? Don't you ever do that again. I have a wife and 2 children. You are not to sew my coat ever again. He had been discharged from the Army, so he was like a bundle of nerves. And I didn't like him because he had a high-ranking position in the Army. You know, doctors did. So I said, okay. So I went back down to Morris Kelsky, and I said, get me out of there. I am not working with a maniac. So he said,
Stayed there.
what?
You stayed there.
Wait a minute. Don't jump the gun. So
Moving right along now.
I went down to Morris Kelsky, and he said, where do you want me to put you now? And he was like at his wit's end.
You worked in every department already.
Yeah. More
There's
or
like nowhere else to go but out.
Well, but you know, I was very sensitive, and anybody that offended me, forget it.
There you go.
I didn't want to work with them. So Morris called Dr. Richmond. He called Dr. Richmond, and he said, I'm taking Sylvia out of your office. Now, knowing that I was such an asset and jumped around here, there, and everywhere, Morris Kelsky was at my fingertips because I was a worker. And people never liked working, but I was a workaholic. So, okay, he said, when are you taking her out? He said, at the end of the week. Okay. So now every day he would yell in from his office, Mrs. Berman, yes, doctor. Are you really going to leave me? Yes, doctor, I am. Well, why? I said, because you offended me. I will not be talked down to. Okay. So a couple of days go by, the end of the week comes, and he says to me, Mrs. Berman, yes, doctor, you're not leaving me. I said, no. Watch me. So I thought about it, and I said, I'm shooting myself in the leg because I really liked working with him. He was a stickler, a perfectionist, and so was I. So we met each other's match. Okay, so now I'm working with him, and Friday comes, and I'm supposed to be transferred to another department. And he says, Mrs. Berman, are you leaving me? And I said, do you want me to stay? He said, yes, I do. I said, okay, then I'm staying. So he called the assistant director again, Morris Kelsky, and he said, you're not transferring her, I'm keeping her, I want her here. Well, I set up the cardiac catheterization lab, and I went to the purchasing department. I got catalogs of equipment that the doctors need and the nurses to perform cardiac catheterization. It sounds very boring, but it was so interesting. I went through every catalog and called companies to get the cheapest available prices on things that they needed, like an operating room table, the lights overhead, the instruments, the cabinets, everything that they needed, sponges, medication. And I got the best possible prices. I put in purchasing requisitions, took it down to the director, had it approved, took it over to purchasing. I said, we need this now. We're going to set up that lab.
She did all this, but yet
My children were my prime responsibility, although when you're working for a living, there are 10 people waiting for your job, so you have to either put out the work or you're fired, whether you're civil service or not. And I would come home lunchtime and make sure Grandma Jenny was there, and she took care of your mother, Ellie, and Uncle Jay. And they were very young children. And she gave them lunch, and she stayed till Grandpa would come from work about 4:30, 5 o'clock.
like normally 4:30. Yeah.
And then he would drive Grandma home. And he took care of your mother and Uncle Jay until I came out of work. Now, living near the hospital was a big advantage to me.
She's just one home.
Yeah. I just crossed the street, walked a couple of blocks.
What time would you get home?
About 5, right?
5:15.
5:15.
Until 5.
Yeah.
So 9 to 5?
Well,
9 to 5.
summertime was till 4 o'clock.
Right. Yeah.
But I never kept a 4 o'clock time because
Aren't you 4:30? You.
pretty much
Yeah.
I stuck to the time because I never wanted to neglect my children. And, you know, the weekends were ours, right? Holidays were ours. I worked my way up to 5 weeks vacation a year with pay. The benefits were wonderful. I retired with a city pension,
Okay.
you know, and it depends on how many years you put in. After 25 years, if you're 65 and you retire, after 25 years of service, you get that amount of money of what your earnings are. If you work beyond the 25 years, you get 1.7% more for each year over 25 years. And so I made good money, and my pension grew and grew.
How many years were you working?
36.
36 years?
Tell the kids about the short time that I had a dog.
You had a dog?
I had
You
a dog,
did?
yeah. Like a week.
I don't think it lasted a week.
I had the measles during that time, so I never got a chance to walk the dog.
You could talk.
Are you want to talk? My Daddy found the dog on the job or something?
No, Uncle Louis brought the
Oh,
dog.
Uncle Louis brought the dog?
Oh,
Okay.
he found the parakeet.
Oh, we got parakeets too. My father would find a parakeet on the job, and he'd bring them home and we'd keep them. So we had two.
Speak louder.
We had 2 parakeets. So,
Yeah.
And then we would put them on my brother's train. And give
Yeah,
them
he had.
rides.
He set up a train in the bedroom. I had to take the beds out of there to
Did you
put
kill a bird as
a
well?
railroad track.
No, I didn't
And
have a bird.
the birds would sit on the train and it would take them around. They never flew off.
And you would never be out there because you didn't want them landing on your head. So she'd scream, "Ow! Put them back in the cage! Ow! Ow!"
Yeah, because I didn't want them tangled into my hair.
But I had a dog, and I had the measles, and I wanted to walk it in the worst way, and I couldn't go outside. And my brother, it turned out, was allergic to the dog. So I was home sick from school, and they had to figure out how to get the dog out of the house while I was still home.
Well, I wanted to get rid of the dog because the dog crapped up my floor something fierce. And I
It
was
was a
up.
puppy.
He was a puppy, right? He wasn't trained.
Right.
So I had to go to work and I had to pick up the crap in the middle of the night, walk around and pick up whatever it made. Okay? So to make a long story short, I did what I did and I went to work.
So
And then-
I was laying on the couch sick, watching TV. My grandmother, there was a door separating the living room and the entrance into the apartment. My grandmother closed that door, and the ASPCA came and took the dog away. And I didn't know it. And then she came back in to watch TV with me, and then I realized there was no dog. And I said to her, "Where's the dog?" And she said, "The dog ran away."
That's Grandma Jenny. That's who I was named after.
Oh, I
Aww.
know, and I was hysterical crying.
TJ, could I get you something to eat or
Oh,
drink?
I'm doing fine. Don't
You
worry
sure?
about me.
Okay,
sure.
I do worry about everybody. It's
Well, I
my,
appreciate that.
my nature. So then you gave birth to
MBL.
Carrie,
MPL.
and then 4 years later to Jennifer, and then 4 years later to Randy. And I was a babysitter with Grandpa. We babysat.
Yeah.
Then Uncle Jay, the other side of the coin. I babysat for him. He had the two boys. He had Gary and Matthew. And Gary was drowning in the amniotic fluid of Shelley when she was pregnant. And I got Dr. John Boyce to deliver him ahead of time, because the doctor I originally got was the head of obstetrics and gynecology that I wrote books with.
Hellman.
During World War II, I wanted to enlist in the Army. They called it the WACS, the Women's Auxiliary Corps. My husband was my fiance then, and he was in the Army, and he said that the women that joined the Army were very promiscuous, and he didn't want me in the Army or in any other branch of the service. So I said, okay, what could I do to help the war effort? So my cousin and I, who I was very close with, Selma,
Yeah.
we joined the American Red Cross, and we went to school at night. She worked with me. I had gotten her a job with the law firm where I worked. And so this is our graduation picture.
Can you tell which one
That's
is Grandma?
during World War II.
The promiscuous looking one.
Which one is she?
Let me see.
What made her the best was her devotion, her family devotion. There was nothing phony about her. You know, she never lied. She never cheated. She was just so good. She did everything in the world for me. And before she and my father, before they died, can I show this? This is a picture of the American Red Cross, graduate nurses who went to school at night during the World War II to contribute their efforts to the war effort. We weren't doctors, but we did. We worked in hospitals to replace nurses who had to go out to the battlefield. And so after working in a law office, we would pack up. I had a cousin who did this with me. And we went out to, it was called Brookdale Hospital now, but it used to be Bethel Hospital in Brooklyn on Linden Boulevard and Avenue A, and devote our time because there was a shortage of nurses during the war. They were sent out to different army camps and battlefields.
Let's take over to another question.
Okay. But this is something,
That's important, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
no,
huge.
sure.
well, it was a big part of my life. So I'm very into the war effort now. Wounded soldiers and, you know, anybody connected with the Army, the Navy, the Marines, the Coast Guard, anybody that protects the United States. I'm into doing things like that.
Right.
Can you talk about the United Nations?
Well, I belong to the United Nations now, but that's like the last phase of what I've been doing. I belong to Global Action on Aging. I've been belonging to them for several years now. And I fight for the elderly because there aren't too many of us around anymore, and they're abused in nursing homes, and that's what I'm fighting for. Equality, dignity. When you die with dignity. Have people take care of you, not beat you, and you end up with wounds on your body and no food. And there's a lot of abuse. I want to stress that. I want to stress how the elderly are neglected, even by families that don't think they're important anymore. They're not productive. We're not important people. And it's very hurtful. It is very, very hurtful.
No.
I have never ignored phone calls. I answer everybody that calls me.
This is Mark.
Everybody's important. Everybody has a need. If they have a need to talk to me, I'm there for them. As far as the other thing goes, I wanted to mention that I was a smoker. I started to smoke when I was 15 years old and could not break the habit until the Surgeon General's report came out. I was 37 years old then, and I had 2 children, and he stressed the fact that if you smoke, you're damaging your lungs, you're breathing in what other people are doing, you're smoking, they're smoking, and you're not going to live. And people did not want to believe that. I smoked as much as 2.5 packs of cigarettes a day,
Daddy smoked too.
a very short period of time.
Yeah, he smoked
He
very
stopped when the Surgeon General's report came out that smoking was detrimental to your health. My sister-in-law, Fran, continued to smoke until about 3 years ago when she developed lung cancer. I tried brainwashing her and telling her how bad it was. I took a carton of cigarettes that I had just bought when I was 37 years old, and what they call a compactor in an apartment building. I threw the carton of cigarettes down the compactor, or the incinerator, if you will, and never took another cigarette, even though it was offered to me. I had enough willpower to say, I'm not going to die. I'm going to be around. I'm going to live to see my children grow. I'm going to live to see my grandchildren. And I have one great-grandchild that I love very dearly. I wish you could see her.
Let me.
I got news for you. I knew that you were up to no good.
But you still let me hang out. Oh, she would be so upset with who I was hanging out with.
Well, Dale was your downfall. And then it was
Mary
Grace.
Mary Jane Kane.
Well, it's all about reading books and wishing that you were there. And there comes a time where you put away enough money where you can afford to do that. So the big trip that I took was with Grandpa when we took 3 weeks off and we went to Europe. And we covered 8 countries. It was Great Britain, 3 weeks, Great Britain, Italy, France,
Switzerland.
Austria, Switzerland, Germany. That was a painful place to
My
go.
father would know.
Every country was amazing. I went to Greece.
With Daddy? Daddy went to Greece?
Yes, he went to Greece. That was when they thought breakfast was included in the price of the room that we took. And we hooked up with another couple. So we're sitting and having breakfast in Greece at the hotel. And the waiter gives us a check, to pay the check. And Grandpa said, this is included in our room. He said, no, it isn't. You have to pay the check. So Grandpa said, I am not paying the check because I've already paid for the room and breakfast is included. So 2 waiters came over, took the tablecloth and gave it a yank with, with all the dishes on it, onto the floor.
That was the end of breakfast.
That was the end of breakfast, but
That's when foreigners don't like Americans sometimes.
we went to Monte Carlo. They didn't let us into the casino. I don't know what the reason was, but we were all over. We took the Bateau Mouche on the Seine, the river. And we went to Italy. We went to the Sistine Chapel. where we saw Michelangelo's ceiling. I mean, all these things that you read about in the book and you say, I want to see it.
Yeah.
I wanted to see the Mona Lisa, which they tell me is 2 by nothing.
It is small. You didn't see it?
No, we didn't get to see that because there was a tremendous line. We did a lot of traveling.
Yes.
One trip, we took a trip to Israel, and that was something I've been wanting. We took what they called the Christianity trip because I was interested in Christianity. I wanted to know what their religion is all about. We took a trip to Israel. It was all mapped out. And I said to Grandpa, whatever is required of us, we're going to do it. So we walked the 14 stations of the cross, where they say Christ carried the crucifix, and at each station he fell, and they had to lift him up because he had the cross on his back. He was judged in Pontius Pilate's judgment hall, which you had to go down into a marble encasement where they sentenced him to die. We went to Bethlehem, where he was born. You go down into a grotto. They built the Church of the Nativity over the grotto, and they have bodies under the floor of the church, are all buried, and it's like a wooden floor. Interesting. Then you go down the steps into the grotto, and there's like a fireplace, and they say, this is the actual spot where Jesus was born. And you kneel down. You could be Jew, Christian, whatever you are. You kneel down there because that's a holy site. And I didn't kneel, but I squatted and I went like this. And then they said it was very cold the night he was born. They moved his body from here to here. So then we walked over to where they moved the body. It was just so amazing to see all that. We went to the Sea of Galilee. On the Sea of Galilee, I was sitting with a jacket in my lap. I swear to God, that jacket was folded up so nicely. It gravitated. I couldn't even stop it. It went up. The arms spread out like this, and it went higher, and it landed into the water, into the Sea of Galilee. It was the creepiest thing that I ever
Were you
experienced.
smoking before?
You're right. I wasn't smoking. It was just an amazing. And then we went to Galilee, where they say that he lived there beyond the gates. They showed us where. And this is where he prayed. And this is where we went to Nazareth, where Mary, his mother, would bathe in a bathtub made out of solid earth. It was ground, the actual ground shaped in a bathtub, and that's where she would bathe. There's so much, and it's from the Bible. You know, everything is taken from the Bible. We went to the Wailing Wall, where Jewish people go and Gentiles do, and even Muslims go there, and black people. They have a big black population that came from Africa that settled in Israel. And they pray in Hebrew. It's just so interesting. Above that is like a plateau. Above the Wailing Wall is a plateau that you walk up steps. And on top of that platform of ground is the Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock is where Moses came to sacrifice his son, Jacob. You know, I really did not mention that I did mention that I have 2 more grandchildren. And, you know, I don't want to discount them. I don't want to badmouth anybody. And, you know, this is what life is all about, is not forgiving but they're things that you have to put out of your mind, or you're going to be miserable and unhappy. Bad things, throw them in the garbage. They're not worth it. They're not worth keeping in your life. You know, you walk away from it. Think of what you're walking into, the future. I'm very proud and happy that you're starting your own business. I'm very proud of that. You're innovative. I hope a little bit of me rubbed off on you. And Randy, I'm so proud of you, and you're my, I look up to you. I got your picture there, and I talk to you every morning, and I say, stay safe, and I pray to God. I do pray to God every morning, and I pray for my grandchildren.
Oh, he loves that.
This is my grandson sitting at my dining room table right now. My Randy, who's married to a beautiful Amy, and they're the love of my life, as all my grandchildren are, and my daughter, my Ellie, my little girl. And you'll always be my little girl. And my Jenny, named for my mother. You're Jennifer, and there's a lot of love there, and it's all wonderful to be loved. These are pictures of my sister Zelda, who died 2 years ago, with me, photographed, and her live-in boyfriend, who died before she did, and they're buried pretty much right next to each other. This is, of course, my favorites, Jennifer and Carrie, my two granddaughters, who I love so much, very dearly. And this is my son Jay and his son Matthew. My son is a high school principal in New Jersey. And that's his other son, the older one, Gary Berman. This is my mother, my older sister who died 2 years ago, and myself. My three beautiful grandchildren, Carrie, who was just here, my Jennifer, my Jenny, and Randy, my police officer. Okay, this is my husband and I in our younger days at my brother's wedding. See her in her younger days. My mother and her sister Lily. They were 7 siblings. This was during World War II. Randy's wedding picture with his beautiful wife, Amy. This is my beautiful daughter, Ellie, who I love very dearly. I depend a lot on her, and she knows that, and I hope she doesn't mind. Sometimes it gets very lonely. And
Yes, yes, yes.
I feel like I call her at very inappropriate times, but
No.
you know, you become a pain in the neck
And
sometimes.
straighten her up all the time too, right?
Well, I had a fractured spine, so I'm bent. I had surgery that was not successful. But you learn to live with the punches. It's what makes you who you are, I guess. I'm just very lucky that I have a wonderful, supportive family who I love very dearly. On September the 11th, between 8:30 and 9 a.m. in the morning, I received a call from my granddaughter, Carrie, who said, "Grandma, did you know that a plane went into the Twin Towers? And I said, what? I could see the Twin Towers from my window. And she said, look out of the window. And I saw, as I looked out of the window to my right, I saw the first tower go down. I think it was Tower 7. And I saw the plane. You couldn't see the plane because it was all up in flames. And then pieces began to fall. And the second tower, I saw the plane go in a short time after the first tower. And I saw that crumble. And I screamed, oh my God. I could not believe what I saw. It stands in my mind. It will never leave my mind forever and ever. I could not imagine how many people died when that occurred. I got my composure and I took my camera that was sitting on my dresser and I took pictures of what happened because the entire smoke was blowing this way. My windows, and it's still here, are covered with soot that you cannot even reach, that I never had it cleaned. My windowsills, my windows were covered with smoke and soot. I had to keep my windows closed. I went down to the street and I was told, go back up in your house. They handed me a mask because I said, I have to go to the store, I have to buy something. I didn't know where to run. I felt like I was a wild woman, not knowing what happened, why would two planes happen, and then it went into my head that this was not an accident, it was a deliberate thing, and I couldn't imagine who would want to do a thing like that, to destroy people's lives and the towers, and I had the black smoke right in here. I have pictures I could show you, but it's very painful. I just keep them hidden. I never show them to anybody. And it's something you never get out of your mind. You never forget it. So 9/11, 2001 was a day you never forget. And in fact, when that anniversary comes, I don't walk out of my house. I still have the original gas mask that was given to me when I walked out that same morning because I didn't know where to run and where to go and what was going on and what was happening. It's just a disaster and a great, great loss to humanity, to people that worked, that went to work without even expecting that they would never come home again, and to their families, their children, sisters and brothers and grandparents. I don't go down that way. I cannot get myself to go down to that part of Manhattan, which could be within walking distance for me, but I won't do it. I just want to remember what I saw and when the buildings were there. And I have pictures in my living room of the towers that I took before they were ever destroyed. And that's my memorial. The Twin Towers are my memorial. It's hard to talk about.
Grandma, my whole life, you've always wanted me to go into acting and performing, and you've always been my biggest fan. And, you know, it's a hard industry to stay in if you're not into all elements of it. And, you know, I love athletics. I love being a fitness expert. But I'm always going to be a performer. It's always going to be in my heart, my blood. I feel like my whole life is a stage. You know, when I did my show in February for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, I invited you out and I called you up. Remember, I called you at 11 o'clock at night. My time was like 2 in the morning, her time. I'm like, Grandma, book a ticket for February 26th, 2011, this year, because I'm doing a show. And you're like, oh my God, who, what, when, where? And I had no idea. It was like literally a dare from Adam Reed at Real Rider Cycling Studio. But anyway, you came out, you got to see me sing and, perform, and my whole life you were always there for me, supporting me with my 200 pages of script when I did theater professionally. And, I thank you for that. If I didn't have you, I wouldn't have been able to memorize all that stuff. And there were times where I couldn't memorize it quick enough, and you're like, you got it, let's do it again, let's go back. I mean, you were like my director, my fan, everything, my audience member. It was awesome. And I remember this song. The reason why I want to sing this song, Grandma, is because I was in 4th grade. Actually, I was in 3rd grade. We sang this song in front of our parents, and I was practicing in my bedroom, and you practiced with me, you sang with me, and this song has stuck with us till this day. And this song actually indicates, what you mean to me.
It means a lot of love, a lot of affection. You're an extension of my life. I come from a very musical family. My grandmother sang in Europe. My grandma Sophie, that was my paternal grandmother. And ironically, I was never close to my father's family, and then my cousins who played at the Metropolitan Opera House, first violinist. The name Wachsel is very big at the Metropolitan Opera.
Oh, really?
Yes, because my cousin Seymour was first violinist there, and he's gone, he passed away. And music has always been part of my life. Even in my dullest moments, the one thing that keeps you going is that bright light of music.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even when you're down, I always say, Jen, where's your spunk? Sing. Sing, right?
So I'll sing to her on the phone. It'll be like a distant concert. But let's sing together. Let's bring back Old Time's Sake, okay? I don't need to watch this or look at these
Well,
words.
I don't know the words, and at least I remembered my whole life's history.
But you don't know the words to our favorite songs.
Words to a song is not easy for me. I don't sing very often, except to myself. And then a lot of the things that I sing are way out, like opera.
Oh my goodness.
Which you don't know.
I don't know that stuff.
Okay.
So let's rock and roll.
So it's called You Light Up My Life.
Cause you light up my life, Surdechaim. Mwah. So many nights I sit by my window, waiting for someone to sing me his song. So many dreams I kept deep inside me, alone in the dark. But now you've come along, and you light up my life. You give me hope to carry on. You light up my days. I'm gonna cry.
And fill my nights with song. Rolling at sea, adrift on the waters. Could it be finally I'm turning for home?
Finally, a chance. Read the words.
Oh, finally a chance to say, hey, I love you. Never again to be all alone.
And you light up my life. You give me hope to carry on. You light up my days and fill my nights with song. Now repeat, right? We go through this every time. And you light up my life. You give me hope
to carry on. You light up my days and fill my nights. Now it goes high. With song, it can't be wrong when it feels so right. 'Cause you sort of like
Jennifer.
You usually call me Jenny. You light up my life. That's my sort of high.
Thank you so much. That's beautiful. That was beautiful. I'm going to miss the hell out of you when you go home. Because you're always there for me. And I hope I'm there for you.
You always are.
24/7.
And you mean that because I do that sometimes.
And I always say that to you, right?
Right. You're like, hello, is everything okay, Jenny? I'm like, yeah.
I sound like a frog.
I just miss you, that's all. Because on LA time, it's a 3-hour time difference.
Yeah.
And she said 24/7, so I take her word.
And I never look at the clock till I hang up and I say, oh my God. I'm only getting 3 hours of sleep tonight.
Because I miss you sometimes.
I know. I miss you too. This plaque is a tribute to my husband, the United States Army. I'm very proud of his record.
And Grandma, you go every single day to where?
Well, this is a sitting area, which I'm ashamed to say I never used. Then across
Why don't you ever sit here, by the way? There is a reason.
I have too many things going on in my head that I have to take care of. Now, across the other building, that's building 1, I'm in building 2.
Right.
They have a gym there, which I belong to. Do I ever work out? No, I don't.
No, you do. You do water aerobics.
Yes.
Tell them about the water aerobics. This is funny. In her bathtub, what are you doing?
Well, in my bathtub, I do arm raises up 10 times, and in order to keep my hands going, I make believe I'm swimming and get my fingers working, and then I do it the opposite way, like I'm doing a backstroke. Then I do my leg raises, knee bends, 70 times in the water. And when you're more buoyant in water than when you're sitting on the floor doing your aerobics.
So anyway, we're leaving the quarters. What I was trying to get at is she won't sit in this area, as nice as it is, because she says she doesn't relate to the people who are her age because she has her marbles, right?
Watch you don't
Tell the truth.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
Watch
don't
the gate. Okay. Well, I get my paper at Cozy Corner, which is just across the street from my house. And then I usually go to the supermarket if I need stuff, and that's a little bit of 1 block further. I love going to 14th Street. I get the bus right down at the corner here, on the corner of Grand and Cherry Street. That's the last stop for the bus. And then I go to 14th Street to Whole Foods.
I taught her about Whole Foods, eating organically and stuff. See, that's why she's still 87 and walking.
Well, I
I'm doing
walk
great.
because I could do this and this.
You don't need anything but yourself, your 2 legs, and your mind.
And money.
And some money, honey.
Money, money, money.
Money, 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 money.
That's his theme song, Donald Trump.
Right, good job. See, she's got it going on.
This is where I get my newspaper. and my ice cream occasionally. Oh, I always have ice cream in the freezer. You come back up, you're welcome to have ice cream. We have a favorite name for the supermarket. It's called Ghetto Mart.
Because it's pretty ghetto. Come follow us.
This is a beauty shop. I don't use them. I do my own hair.
The thing that I love about Grandma is she's so real all the time.
This is my dry cleaner.
So this is the overpriced dry cleaner over here.
This is a Chinese restaurant where I never eat. This is a bike shop. I don't ride a bike.
No, because you got your water aerobics. You don't need to bike.
Well, but I also do the bike in the gym if I ever go in, when I'm not too lazy to go across the courtyard.
That'd be so cool if he is here, actually.
What?
That'd be so cool if he's here.
Is Marco here today?
Yes.
Oh, in the back?
No, he should be around here. Danny with Michael.
This is my granddaughter from Los
Hi,
Angeles.
nice to meet you.
They're filming my life.
Okay, so we need to find Marco. Oh, there he is. Yeah, solo mi familia está aquí. Hola, ¿cómo estás? Tú estás la estrella en la vida de mi abuela.
Yeah. Come.
De California, muy bien.
Skinny.
Huh?
Estás bien flaca.
Me? Oh, really?
¿Verdad?
He's saying I'm skinny. Mucho ejercicio.
Are you good today?
Yeah.
I'm going to give publicity.
See how famous my grandma is? That's why she took Spanish classes, so she can have like the best of both worlds. She loves you so much. Every time I'm on the phone with her, she always says that you get her the ice cream that she loves so
No
much.
more, you don't do it. No more, you're finished with me.
Watch out.
Fire me?
I don't want him to get fired.
No, that's
What do you
okay.
want, ice cream?
I want a kiss.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.
Grandma.
No,
Here, come
not
this way.
today. I'll come later.
Okay.
You here tomorrow? Yeah. Okay. I'll see you. Yeah. To get her on camera, look how beautiful. It's my favorite.
She loves you guys so much. You're awesome. So
Good
thank you. Have a good day, good weekend. All right. We got some live plants here. Let's
Say
get 'em,
people
Mark.
in California do not want to sing New York, New York.
How come? So the bus just passed. The bus, what bus do you take, Grandma?
The number 14A to Union Square to my favorite supermarket, which is Whole Foods.
Right.
And I had to say that this is my favorite. But this is my fill-in market, but they all know me here too.
Yeah, you're very popular there.
Well, I feel that there's a God above that looks out over everybody that I love. And I want nothing but peace in the world.
Yeah.
I want every religion to love everybody. And I don't know if that's ever going to happen in my lifetime. I would
Right.
like it to happen, but there's been ongoing feuds and battles and wars for so many years. And the pity of it all is seeing how many people die unnecessarily,
Right.
that are not ill, that are healthy. You know, you just want a peaceful, quiet life. You want to go about doing your own thing and not having anybody interfere in your life, telling you what to do, what not to do. And I see my own shortcomings. I see myself as not being perfect. Maybe loneliness makes you talk out sometimes about how you feel. And you reach out. Who do you reach out to? You reach out to your family and your friends.